And welcome, folks, to this special live edition to the Michigan Recruiting Insider Signing Day. I remember when the first Wednesday in February used to be Christmas in February. This used to be the day that all the college programs, all the FBS programs in the land used to point to. This was the day when they set their calendars for the next year because they restocked. They harvested the talent that they had been sort of mining and planting and nurturing for years, right? Well, now it's basically a footnote, but for a few programs who, kind of capped their recruiting classes off. Michigan was one of those fortunate few today as they capped their 2025 class off with a bang today. One of the top prospects in the land. And so fitting that we have a special live edition of the Michigan Recruiting Insider today with my man, Steve Lorenz. No Bryce marriage today because we're going to do a regular episode of the Recruiting Insider either tomorrow or Friday. We'll be letting you know about that. But joining me, as he does every single episode, my man, Steve Lorenz from the Michigan Insider. Steve, how are you?
Good, Sam. Yeah, this is normally the big day. I actually had like a notification this morning from a past signing day, and this was always the day we get up at, kind of what we do in December now. But yeah, it's definitely not what it used to be, the early February signing day. But yeah, for Michigan, signing, I believe, was the top unsigned prospect in the 2025 class today, with Ty Haywood to finish out what I think sixth overall in the cycle, right? They jumped Auburn, I believe, and they're only behind the ones who are usually up there: Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama. So yeah, one of Michigan's best classes on paper in years for sure.
Yeah, man, it was considering the season and how it was going, right? And say around the Indiana game, how fortunes turned from that point to now. Wow, what a difference a few weeks, a few months make. The fortunes in the class, the fortunes on the field, the fortunes in the hearts and minds of Michigan fans and alums everywhere. Because Michigan at that point in the recruiting rankings, talk about afterthoughts. Michigan wasn't even like a blip on the radar as far as the top teams in the country concerned. Certainly weren't considered among the top 10. Weren't even sniffing that. Now, number 6 in the country. We will dive deep into the Ty Haywood landing. But first things first, huge shout out to our sponsors, starting off first, like we do every episode, shouting out Wolverine, the apparel provider. Wolverine boots, we talk about them all the time. And Wolverine celebrating hard work and celebrating the gear that Wolverine provides us. And I am rocking today. This is my favorite piece of Wolverine gear. Got to shout out the Wolverine University of Michigan Overman hooded canvas shirt jack. See, now, ordinarily, I don't rock a piece of gear that actually shows a Wolverine or a Block M. But listen, I mean, it's commit day. This is signing day. So you can wear a piece of gear that actually has Michigan on it. I'm going to be going to the Michigan game a little bit later. It's cold. It's chilly outside. So listen, you got to dress accordingly. And if you go to Wolverine.com and whether it's this shirt jack or the Bucksaw jack, producer Ben, I can't remember the name of the Bucksaw. I think it's the Bucksaw jack. I think it is. You put it up on the screen for the people. You can get 15% off now any of the Wolverine apparel. And here's what you need to know. You shop the Wolverine line of gear that is supported by several Michigan student athletes. A portion of the proceeds from that valiant line benefits Champion Circle. So all of that money that you spend on the Wolverine Valiant line, a portion of that money benefits Michigan NIL. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. That Bucksaw shirt, Jack. That's another one of my favorites. So you see him. That was last year's. Some of last year's representatives: Donovan Edwards, Mason Graham. You saw Colston Loveland, and they go across they run the gamut. I mean, you see student athletes from multiple sports. Wolverine supports student athletes from across the athletic department spectrum. They support Michigan NIL, and they're going to continue to do it because they support Michigan, and Michigan student athletes support them. It's blue collar work ethic. That's Wolverine. That's Michigan. That should be you too. That's also the Michigan Insider. So support Wolverine. All right. This was a big one, Steve. Ty Haywood, the push was super strong toward the end of the early signing period. We knew the decommitment from Alabama was on the horizon, but there were a lot of teams kind of pushing. Now, you knew it wasn't just about the interest. You knew NIL was going to be a major play, but we told people at the time that Michigan was a big time player in the NIL space, but it was selective. Michigan wasn't going to spend indiscriminately like some schools. It was going to slot. So there were going to be some schools, they're going to pick and choose, but on the prospects that they decided that they were going to be players for, that they weren't just going to get bum rushed out of the mix. They decided they were going to be players for Ty Haywood, and you see right here, they were players for Ty Haywood.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, maybe more than any individual recruitment, this will be a good litmus test for NIL fit, that type of thing. Because Michigan was never a factor in Ty Haywood's early recruitment before he committed to Bama. I mean, they were kind of an afterthought, right? I mean, they really did sort of emerge here late, heading into the first signing day, and then kind of quietly won this race. We knew he wasn't going to sign with Alabama. Like you said, the decommitment was inevitable. It was almost kind of surprising he didn't do it before the first signing day. I mean, I just feel like they'd already kind of parted ways. But yeah, I think we'd say, Sam, a 5-star talent, right?
Yeah, man.
Whatever. Anyway, but and so for Michigan, you're basically, I think Haywood is a potential swing guy, but you could be looking at two bookends. At tackle, both 5-star caliber players, and like you said, if I'm Michigan, there's talk about the portal, how that all went this offseason with some misses and stuff up front. I'm putting my money on 5-star prospects like these guys before I'm overspending. Some of the numbers you'd hear in the portal were ridiculous for frankly, replacement level fill-ins, I guess, is there's really no other way to put it. They like you said, they choose the right kind of guys to go after, both in the portal and on the recruiting trail with the NIL. And Ty Haywood, another guy who really frame-wise looks like a future NFL, like just looks like an NFL body type deal. So can't say enough on how to finish off this class.
Yeah, man, it's you raise an interesting point when you talk about spending and how the NIL dollars and the strategy kind of affects how you operate portal versus recruiting. When you spend in the portal, how much you spend in the portal affects your roster differently versus how much you spend in recruiting. So, for instance, you go spend, I'll give you a perfect example. If Rayshon Benny hears a fake number about Damon Payne, right? That's a problem. That's a problem because I'm looking at these stats, these college stats, and that's a tangible number that I can look at. This is tangible production that I can look at and say, wait a minute. I'm looking over here and I'm looking over here, and I can measure these things, and I can say, production-wise, I should be getting more than this. Now, when you talk about recruiting, this is kind of like, when first-round draft picks get picked in the NFL draft, and rookies get more than some of these guys who are NFL guys, right? It's like future deals. Like rookies get paid on the promise of, which is different than free agents. Right? You see what I mean? So you can pay a rookie more than a free agent because it's a rookie deal. I mean, there's this understanding that rookies just get more money. I mean, veterans don't like it, but there's just an understanding that that's just the way it goes. Now, it's a begrudging thing right now. You're in the early stages of that in college football. It's not like the vets like it, but it is a little easier right now to float that than it is some of these guys in the portal. You go telling them, I'm going to pay this portal guy more than I pay you. It's like, man, get the hell out of here. You go tell them I'm going to pay a rookie or a freshman this 5-star that, they might not like it, but it's a little easier to float that right now, Steve.
Yeah, and maybe for like a proven portal player, even it's a little bit right. Like you said, I think the big thing is, and if you look right now, like in the portal rankings, a lot of the schools that are near the top are those middle level, mediocre schools. You talk about like Kentucky or Nebraska or Florida State, schools that aren't in the type of position that a school like Michigan is, where you already have a lot of high-end talent on your roster that you, like you said, Sam, you have to keep them in your good graces as well. You can't just start throwing money around at guys to bring in just to bring in some guys while taking the risk of, pissing off the guys that are already on your roster, the guys that are producing, right? So, I think with Michigan, like we said, aggressiveness was their approach, but not recklessness. There's a huge difference between being aggressive and just being reckless and just, I'm thinking of the kid the tackle that signed with Kentucky, Pete, the kid from New Mexico.
Oh man.
Right? Like
number was ridiculous.
Yeah, like again, it's just Michigan, that's not the game that Michigan is going to play with this stuff, right? Not unless you're like a Justice Haynes, probably a little bit different at the end of the day, right? Because that's a proven number 1, number 2 level back at one of the, Alabama, right? I mean, produce more backs than whoever. But point being, it really makes a huge difference. Like you said, I think the rookie scale versus the veteran scale is a really good way to put it because, the rankings and the reputation these guys have coming in out of high school as future stars, like you said, a lot different than bringing in a guy who's maybe a second, third unit dude for his program that you might, you're looking at your first string guys who are like all conference level players, it's not going to add up there.
Yeah, you can't think of it. So Lama Bryant says, how is U of M really hard capped in the NIL cash with Champion Circle? Don't look at it like that. First of all, it's not like Champion Circle. It has a bottomless pit of money. It's like, dude, like, Champion Circle has a budget. Champion Circle has to fundraise for that money. You realize that they have a campaign. Llama, now our friends at Champion Circle, we did the signing day show. Did you donate, Llama? I'm sure they want us right now to say, hey, donate to Champion Circle. My friends over there, Jared is like, thank you, Sam. I'm sure he's saying that right now, right? Man, they got to fundraise for that money. That's not endless money, right? And so, but it's even if that were the case, even if they were flush with money, it's not like they just pay these guys in a vacuum. Like they just sign a guy and it doesn't affect the guys that are on the roster. That you got to take that into consideration. You sign a guy, how does that impact the guys who you have? What if you sign a guy and it has a ripple effect to the guys on the roster and makes them unhappy? What if it makes a guy that you have say, all right, you just signed him, when the spring portal window hits, I'm out. What if you go sign a portal guy on the offensive line or defensive line, and it makes one of your starters that you have, say, after the spring window, say, okay, you just did that, spring portal, I'm jumping in the portal and I'm going someplace else. Now what? Now you just lost. You thought you took one step forward and you just took 2 steps back.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely. I feel like sometimes people think that those photos when the coaches are out on the road, I think some people think that like Larry Ellison's going to be out there with the kids, like, shaking hands with the high school coaches and stuff. Right. So, that's another area where a guy like Sean Magee plays such a huge role. Right. And it's about, it's the bottom line, but it's about balancing what you have and what you want to bring in, because it's so delicate in certain situations where if you're Michigan, you do want to get some depth on the defensive line. But yeah, the last thing you want to do is stain your standing with Rayshon Benny, knowing that he's a guy, if he ever wanted to walk out the door and go find out what his value is, he probably could, So I don't envy their position, because it's got to be a constant back and forth with not just the guys you're trying to get, but the guys who are already on your team.
Right, and it's a constant thing where teams are constantly trying to push your players into the portal. Constantly. That never stops.
And do you understand? You see these schools that are canceling their spring games now. Do you think that, like, what do you think about that? Do you think, is that stupid? Like,
no, man. I just, to me, that's like keeping your wife locked up. Yeah. like that. Does your wife never go to the grocery store? I mean,
right. No, yeah. It's like, that's true. That is because, right? Because I'm not the spring game has always been kind of whatever to me, but I feel like the rules explanation for it is ridiculous in that regard, right? They're gonna tamper. They're gonna figure out who's performing well during your spring practices, regardless. It's not one spring game is not going to make a difference.
Yeah, I just feel, do what you're supposed to do. Take care of your players, and you'll be fine. That's how I feel. If you're doing what you're supposed to do, if you're mining the end, it's not to say that, it's not to say that you won't lose some players, but if the culture is good, if your coaches are maintaining proper relationships, if you are doing things in a fair way, because look at how Michigan has been doing, Steve. I mean, Michigan has been doing a remarkable job when it comes to their guys haven't been jumping in the portal. By and large, I mean, they've had some guys go to the portal, but think about it. On balance, Michigan hasn't been having a mass exodus of players jump in the portal. What that suggests to me is culture's been really good. Coaches have pretty good relationships on a per position basis with their players, right? That the NIL is pretty healthy at Michigan, that they do a pretty good job of having that balance between, okay, we're going to go in the portal and look for some guys. We aren't out of whack. We're saying, hey, we're going to go out and pay more in the portal than we are paying our guys that we have here, right? So they're doing a good job of having the balance that you need to have in order to make sure that you have proper balance on your roster.
Yeah, so I think, the message has probably been clear to the current players, and Michigan is backing up what they've been putting out there with their players as far as the NIL stuff goes, right? No unkept promises. We've seen at other programs, some of these programs where got 25, 30 guys have been leaving, and then you're hearing stories about they weren't getting paid what they said they were going to get paid, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, it feels like Michigan's been clear with the guys on their current roster, and the guys have been getting what they were promised and what they were told they were going to get, from the get-go, right? I mean, I feel like that's your biggest indicator of whether or not your culture is healthy right now in this landscape, and if your NIL situation is healthy as well. So
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all things said, I feel like they've played things like you said about as well as they probably could have played them. A couple misses at some spots, but every school's been missing. Nobody's batting 1,000
Right.
with this stuff anyway. So
Right. And so you can see, getting back to Ty Haywood, so you got to make some decisions NIL wise. So whether that's in the portal or in recruiting based on position. So we can think about guys, for instance, like receivers. So there were some big time receivers that they were in it for, and you can kind of see, like maybe they led for, and then they're like real pivots where they kind of got to a point, and then it was like, all right, they kind of self-selected out. And you could tell when there's a hard pivot like that. I see it as there's a line at that position, like they're slotting, and they're saying there's a line that we aren't going to go past at this position. Like there's a slot at this position that we, you know what, but for Haywood, it's like, okay. Or Bryce Underwood, it's like, what did I say? When that whole thing started, I said, we aren't going to get beat on Bryce Underwood on NIL. You might beat us on something else. It's not going to be NIL. So that's why for Bryce Underwood, it's like money was not the consideration. They removed money from the table. So now his consideration is, are you going to beat us on football? Are you going to beat us on academics? Are you going to beat us on some other things? Because they made it so don't even worry about the money. We got that covered, kind of thing. Ty Haywood, or Andrew Babalola, the slotting that they did at those positions, tackles, left tackle, the value that they placed, the NFL model, we're right there. And so they made it very, very clear at these positions, we are going hard in the paint. And so, yeah, I think in the fall window, when people were wondering if Michigan was going to be in it for the long haul, I think they threw down the gauntlet in the fall and made it clear when he's making it like I'm wavering on Alabama. Michigan stepped to the fore. Florida State, I think it was Florida State, Texas Tech, and people was like, even when those schools started to kind of be like, man, we think Michigan is leading, it should have been clear then how big a player NIL wise that Michigan was. And then when they got him up on the visit, I thought the interesting thing to me at that point was they got him up. First of all, they went down on that visit and they took Sean Magee. Now I know Sean Magee he's been on the road here recently, but I think that particular trip was the first leg of his travels, and he went to see Ty Haywood. There was a message in that to me, because when he went on the road for the first time in the fall, the first leg, like his first stop, do you remember what it was? Bryce Underwood. Message, Steve. Like, hey, the first time I'm on the road, I'm going to see the top priority. It's like, hey, man, any questions you got about what we're doing, finance, NIL? The GM is on the road getting this question answered. Now, he wasn't the only one. You had your offensive coordinator out there, offensive line coach, the whole staff was there, but the GM being on the road in that moment at that time, I thought was very, very significant. By the time he gets on the visit, to me, I think the NIL questions were answered. I thought the most significant thing at that point was that his mom made it up on the visit and that she was having that experience at that time. I know you still want to fend off late NIL plays, but I thought that Michigan had already kind of, said, hey, kind of same thing with Bryce, we're going to fend off all challengers on that front.
Yeah, and it's very clear also right now that Michigan their, if we call it a cap for recruiting high school prospects, is going to be much higher than in the portal. And not just because they're recruiting, they're going to take more kids, but I'm talking about, like you talk about a Ty Haywood or an Andrew Babalola. Those guys are going to take precedence over mid-level, like, you know, even a relatively high level portal guy, unless it's an absolute stud who's leaving, you know, and that's why I think the cap for Michigan recruiting wise now, or the ceiling, has definitely been raised. I think, you know, and I think you might see even more of it in 2026, right? I mean, you see how they closed out in 2025 here. I mean, you're talking Underwood, Babalola, Haywood, Earls, all these guys that in cycles past before NIL, I mean, how many of these guys does Michigan actually sign? I mean, they flipped a kid from Clemson, Georgia, LSU, Alabama. I mean, it's like kind of uncharted territory in that regard. And, you know, I think NIL was a big reason why. So, you know, yeah, for Michigan it is. And yeah, seeing Magee on the road, obviously, yeah, that was a huge, you know, it's sort of the equivalent of what it used to be to see the head coach on the road. It's like, you know, these are the guys that they're really making that message clear for. And then they were able to kill a few birds with one stone and drop them in some of the other areas of the country throughout winter eval for some top 2026 guys that they're recruiting, right? I mean, they went and saw a couple kids in Dallas along with Haywood that they're really heavy after. So yeah, I mean, overall, you know, like I said, I think when we talk about NIL, I do. And I mean, I would even maybe borrow the phrase, I think Marcus Freeman mentioned this before the national championship game, was that they're going to major in the recruiting trail and minor in the transfer portal. I mean, Michigan has kind of already taken that same approach, but I think that's really what people should maybe expect from here on out, as far as, you know, look for them to swing for the fences with the top high school talents in the country, and then supplement after that. And it's another area where having superior evaluation ability can end up mattering too, right? We know Michigan's always done a great job at evaluating high school talent. Well, there's value to evaluating portal kids too. I mean, you're seeing, I mean, we have a full top 247 of portal prospects in this period alone, let alone the spring. You know, that's an area where Michigan can still pick and choose the right guys to add without, like you said, Sam, upsetting the balance of the current roster.
Yeah, I see some people, you know, commenting on his rankings drop. Yeah, it's very very conspicuous, the timing of his drop. I can't deny that you know, his drop seemingly coinciding with his decommitment from Alabama. It does. Listening to the rankings, guys, I guess his rankings drop had been on the table for some time. Apparently, what I would say is his athletic profile, regardless of what you may think about his senior film or how he performed in an all-star game, his athletic profile has not changed. 6'5", 285 pounds, super long arms, tremendous athleticism. You just can't teach. And I think that you put him in Michigan's program with its track record for development and the offensive line tutelage, the combination of, you know, of course you got Grant Newsome, but I'm an offensive line coach, Grant Newsome. But when you combine that with, of course, Sharon Moore, Juan Castillo's in the building now, Brett Inglis in the building. I mean, you got offensive line acumen up the wazoo, with that tremendous athletic. He is a pile driver of an offensive lineman with the disposition to match. I just think, man, the skill set you can't teach. The stuff that they're talking about, you can teach. You can teach pad level. You can teach. You can teach the motor. Playing every snap. The stuff that they were talking about, you can teach that stuff. I think that this dude, he's not Andrew Babalola. I'm not arguing that. But dropping him 20, I don't think that he is 22 spots worse than he was a month ago.
It's like, even if it was like 15 or 20, it's like dropping him from a 5-star to a 4-star. Is, like it's the perception of that, right? That I think really, because that's, I think, what people immediately point to. And like we've made it clear at this point, rightfully so, I think that people are sort of pointing this one out because, yeah, it's and with no clear explanation at this point, I don't feel like, at least on our board, for our users who have been
I think
wondering.
I think the biggest criteria. Well, I don't know. You're right. I think they said they saw him at the All-Star game. But
that's,
again,
whatever.
So, but neither here nor there.
Right.
Like I said, I mean, he gives you between the arm length, how nimble he is. I mean, the athletic profile, the things you can't teach. It'd be different if he couldn't bend, if he wasn't quick, if he wasn't explosive. Just the athletic profile. To me, if he didn't have those traits, the traits are the things that, to me, the projection to me is what's important. You project the athletic traits. And to be, that's what I'm looking at. And you put that with Michigan's track record for development. Yeah, I think the dude has potential that is, it's a shade below Andrew Babalola, because Andrew Babalola is, 6'6" and some change, and just, he is a, in an NBA power forward out there playing, left tackle. I mean, he just has measurables that are a cut above. But next level below that is Ty Haywood, who, like you said, has inside out versatility. He might be a guard at the next level, and a power guard. I mean, this dude could be, it'll be interesting to see how he and Avery Gatch, how they play out. And that could also depend on what happens with guys who are currently on the roster, how they play.
Yep.
Because you got some guys with tackle profile that are currently on the roster that could affect what happens with a Ty Haywood and an Avery Gatch.
Yeah, I was going to say, you talk about guys in the, like, we talk about how great this class was up front in the offensive line. Combine that with what they did last cycle, probably the best 2-year stretch for sure that I can remember. Right, Blake Frazier, Andrew Sprague, Ben Roebuck, Jake Guarnera, Luke Hamilton. Right, I mean, they signed those 5 guys last cycle, and then you add the guys that you add this cycle. You talk about Avery Gatch. Caden Strayhorn also, right, who Michigan loved. Like we said, I think last episode, not just a guy they took because his dad announces for Michigan State. I mean, they really liked his game. They like his passion for the game. So yeah. No, I mean, it will be interesting though to see with Haywood. But yeah, again, kind of interesting. That his athletic profile hasn't changed. And our rankings are based on projections and not. Yeah. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I don't like somebody talking about Andrew Marsh falling in the rankings. Like, I just absolutely do not agree with that. Absolutely,
yeah, that's
do not agree with that. Vehemently disagree with Andrew Marsh dropping in the rankings. I think that's just Could not disagree more.
I think we kept him relatively high. I think it was a different service that actually I think dropped him all the way to what, a 3-star, right?
That's ridiculous.
That's
utterly ridiculous.
Pretty,
but,
interesting.
We'll see in a few years. We'll see in a few years.
Maybe before a few years, maybe in a couple of years, we'll see.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Before we switch the highest rated offensive line class in history, you got 2 top 10 tackles. It's on the strength of Andrew Babalola, mostly being the highest rated offensive lineman in school history. But now you got 2 top 10 offensive tackles to buoy the class. It's the highest rated offensive line class in school history. Now, that doesn't mean it'll be the top performing offensive line class in school history. You have to wait to see how they actually play. But this is big time work. Shout out to Grant Newsome. We don't, we talk a lot about the recruiting jobs that a lot of these coaches have done. We've talked about the job that Ron Bellamy has done on the recruiting trail this year because he's been maligned. And we talk about Andrew Marsh. Listen, people aren't paying attention if they're maligning Ron Bellamy and not paying attention to the job he did there, right? You talk about Sharon Moore broadly. Great job that Brian Jean-Marie did this year. Pound for pound, I think if you had to pick recruiter of the year as an assistant, that might be Lamar Morgan for the job that he did this year. Lou Esposito did a whale of a job recruiting, like the job the staff did. But Steve, Grant Newsome, the Andrew Babalola job alone was amazing. But consider the in-state guys, Caden Strayhorn and Avery Gatch. Neither of those guys were walks in the park, and got those done on top of, here at the very end, being able to bring home Ty Haywood.
Isn't Avery a MSU legacy also?
Yes, he is.
Right. So you're talking half of your class, offensive line class, your highest rated offensive line class is 4-star Michigan State legacies, right? And I know Avery committed early, but that wasn't necessarily because he was like a super heavy Michigan lean. Like you said, they had to fight like throughout to secure that one, right? And to be fair, to keep him fully committed. I don't think teams stopped calling him after he committed to Michigan. And then with Caden, he had Bama, Florida. I mean, because he transferred to IMG, so some of the schools down south took notice as well. So Michigan had some competition there. And then with Andrew, you had the interesting combo, right? He had Stanford, Auburn was heavily involved because I think his brother goes to school somewhere near Auburn. I think he's another, like they're both they're super, super smart, right? But and then with Ty Haywood, again, coming out of nowhere sort of with that one. I mean, Grant, obviously young, but measured, intelligent dude, knows how to connect with kids, but as importantly, as a young guy, can connect with the families really well too. And that's what's going to get your foot in the door, I think, initially, and it's going to put you in a lot of races. Here's the other thing, Sam. I think it's possible, we'll see, from top to bottom, I think Michigan could top the 2025 class with what they sign in 2026 up front on the offensive line. They are in on some big time names across the country. And so it'll be fascinating to see, after what they did in 24 and 25, to see what Grant can do in 26. But as far as like the position they're in with some guys right now, there are some more big names up front, including the number 1 player in the country in Jackson Cantwell is one, where Michigan there's a top 6. Michigan's at least in the middle there, if not maybe more towards the top. Along with a wealth of other guys across the country. You got kids in Utah, California, Texas, Florida. I mean, all over the place that they're in for. So, I mean, pound for pound, you probably got to go with Lamar. this cycle. I mean, it had to have been one of their top defensive back classes they've ever signed as well. When you consider the rankings of all five, I think 5 guys that they signed, right? So, Tony Alford, I think has put Michigan in 2026. You move towards 2026. Alford is a name to watch for Michigan as far as like their top recruiter. I mean, he's got him in with the number 1 back in the country, who's Savion Hyder, who we talked about, and Javion Osborne. So, top to bottom, this is one of Michigan's best recruiting staffs I think we've ever covered. To be fair, there's usually a couple guys on most college staffs that just aren't as effective on the recruiting trail as others. And right now, as far as the positional coaches go, I mean, Michigan's pretty strong all the way across.
Yeah, and this I hate to sound like we're I don't want to sound like this a bunch of hyperbole, right? But this torrid sort of recruiting pace that they were on here in the contact period. I mean, it was they were everywhere. And it was like they were doing like 5-6 schools in a day. Every coach, including Sharon Moore. Like, it was dizzying the pace. Like, you couldn't keep up. To the point where I didn't blame. I was like, what? You're where? Like, what? Like, Sharon Moore was in, he was in the DMV like on a Friday, and then you look up on Sunday, he's in Hawaii. Like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, it's like, that's like, assistants don't even do that. Like, what are you doing?
Like, I want to say so when the winter eval, the very first day, I think Grant Newsome was in Hawaii to see Malachi Lee and took a red eye that night to Atlanta to see, and was in Bear McWhorter's school in Cartersville, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, I think at like 8:00 the next morning, and then still saw Gregory Patrick in Portage, Michigan later that afternoon, right? I mean, just to give you, and that's just the first 2 or 3 days. I mean, that was pretty much the pace throughout the entire winter. Yeah. Like, you ever want to figure out or learn of a good brand of coffee, you might want to maybe reach out to like a college assistant. They'll probably be able to hook you up with something that'll keep you awake throughout the day.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting sort of case study to really see what kind of dividends what kind of return they get from that pace that they get, because that was different. A different pace for them as a staff. I don't recall that kind of pace. I mean, they've had staffs that really hit the trail, but that was a higher level as a staff, and that was exponentially higher pace for a head coach. They've never had Michigan's head coaches never hit the trail at a pace like that. Not even close. Not even remotely close.
100%. And I was going to say that's maybe the biggest difference is, and I don't think it surprises us, Sam, knowing Sharon. He's a recruiter at heart, right? I mean, he was the best recruiter on Michigan's staff for at least a couple of years when he was an assistant. I mean, we still talk about the Dax Hill recruitment, like a guy not at his position, not even his side of the football. He's out recruiting corners in California. I mean, he's always been a grinder. So to have that guy at the top, that's really I feel like it could be one of those deals. Like, he sort of sets the tone for the rest of the staff in that regard, where it's like, if your head coach is a grinder on the recruiting trail, I think guys are going to feed off of that. And this was definitely a different pace. And I think that pace with NIL, gives Michigan a good foundation early on with 26. Because again, I mean, I do the target list. February is usually the month I do the target list. I mean, there's more top 100 guys at the top target list. And I think guys who are going to stick in the top 100 too, not just guys who are there right now, than I think I can ever remember. And guys that it feels like Michigan are in the top 2 or 3, 4 as things stand. So, that's where that stuff pays off. It's about securing the visit in the spring and then getting the official visit in the summer, and then hopefully getting some commitments.
I want to hit on a few 26s before we get out of here and get over to watching some Michigan basketball. Before we do that, and before we talk about passes, I do want to address a question or a comment from Ryan Young on Facebook, who brings up something. He says, I understand not wanting to upset the current roster, but only till this was a point we were making about NIL and how, you have to be cognizant of how what you do NIL wise in the portal, for instance, how it might affect your current roster. You can't just go out and be like, hey, I'm going to drop this huge bag on this portal guy without care or concern about how it might affect my current roster, especially if it's a middling guy, right? And so Ryan says, I understand I wanted to upset the current roster only to a point. Saban never worried about that, and it worked out pretty well for him, obviously. I don't think you can ever have too much talent, and especially with the portal NIL, that should only be more so now than ever. The QB situation this past season proves that. Keep going after top talent regardless of to what you already have. Ohio State had 3 of the top-rated receivers in the country in 21, and the top 3 backups would have, I don't know what he went on to say after that. So, Ryan, you do understand that circumstances are different. You understand that Nick Saban retired
because of NIL, pretty much because of NIL. Yeah, that's the first thing I thought too.
He left because stuff done changed, bruh. He couldn't do this anymore because now you gotta worry. Because if you think you don't have to be concerned about how it might affect your current roster will leave. If you go out in the portal, I'm just let me be clear. If you go out in the portal and you say, I'm just going to use Rayshawn Benny as an example. And you go out and you say, I'm going to pay a guy that is less productive than Rayshawn Benny more than Rayshawn Benny and not adjust what I'm going to pay Rayshawn Benny, right? I'm going to go pay this guy. Let's play this out. He's out there. The price of this guy is going up. I'm going to pay him this money. Boom. I pay him. Rayshawn said, well, wait a minute. You paying this? I'm more productive than this dude. We got some problems here. Wait, we already signed you to a contract. It is what it is, bro. Oh, it is what it is? Fine. I'm jumping in the portal. All right, Rayshawn. All right. We're gonna sign you. We'll adjust your contract. Oh, wait, hold up. Now everybody else. Oh, you guys are adjusting Rayshawn's contract? Well, what about me? Let's adjust my contract too. Since we're in the contract adjusting business, maybe we should adjust my contract. You see how this works?
Be a line out the door.
It'll be a line out the door.
Yeah, right.
So you see why you gotta be mindful of that kind of thing. You can't. It sounds easier than it is. So you have to pay attention. You can't just spend indiscriminately. You got to be careful. You got to be mindful of what you do, of how you spend, because it does have an effect. It does have an impact. And it just so happens that Michigan managed the situation accordingly. They managed it appropriately, right? You saw what was out there. Did the NIL, the collectives did it right. Salaries accordingly. Saw who was what. Certain guys were due bumps as they negotiated their deals. They got adjusted accordingly, and all is right with the world. But don't think you can just, just spend what you got to spend, what you want to spend in the portal. It doesn't affect what you're doing on the roster. No. And as it relates to the, I guess we got to mention the Notre Dame with Rocco and Coogan. That had more to do with the spring portal. spring practice. Once it's clear. I mean, NIL was a big, but it had more to do with the fact that they can't go through spring ball in Ann Arbor. I think it's at Indiana. You have a different academic calendar where they could just, there's a different I think they call it like a trimester, something. I can't remember what they call it. So there's a whole different period that's starting up like now that you can enroll, and boom, you can go throw through spring ball. Coogan can. And then Nebraska, I guess you should just get it. You could just make some exceptions. I guess you could just, I don't know if it's just admissions could just step in or the president just steps in and just voila. But admissions nor the president is going to make an exception and just admit a guy in February. That's just not going to happen here. Sorry. It's just not. So, sorry. All right. It is time, before we start talking 2026 recruiting, listen, we have a great sponsor. You heard of Passes. So Passes, the platform, the content platform that struck an NIL agreement with Michigan, the first of its kind, the partnership with Michigan, that created an opportunity for Michigan student athletes unlike any other. So now at the University of Michigan, a student athlete can monetize his or her name, image, likeness in ways that they can't in other places. And so what do I mean? With the Passes platform, a student athlete can take their name, their image, their likeness, and go on to their Passes storefront, is what we'll call it, and use that storefront, to house their content. Now they have a storefront, so you can go to their Passes storefront, and you can see their merch, you can see their content, you can see everything that they have going on. And not only that, they can use, by virtue of their connection through Passes, they can use the block-in, right? So now, by virtue of their connection to Passes and all of their relationships with companies across the country and the world, and their dealings with these companies, and their relationships that they have with advertisers across the country, now athletes have access to deals and content creation opportunities that they didn't have before this. It is an innovative and opportunity-filled endeavor that student athletes at the University of Michigan have access to, courtesy of Passes, and you can support them by going to the Passes platform. You should be checking frequently for these opportunities. You see student athletes have signed up, so you can check on a regular basis by going to passes.com and going to the different student athlete portals to see what the student athletes who are signed up through Passes have added. Some have added their merch, some have added their content, whether that be videos they've added, photos they've added, all kinds of content they're putting up on their Passes storefront. So be checking that out on a regular basis. Their membership opportunities as well. Be checking that out on a regular basis on passes.com. This is a direct partnership that Passes signed with the University of Michigan, and this allows student athletes to use the block. I mean, remember back when NIL first started and student athletes didn't have access to be able to when they signed a deal, they couldn't wear their uniforms. They couldn't wear anything with the Block M. Well, with this deal, they can actually do that. They can appear on their passes storefront with their uniform on, with the Block M, through this deal. Innovative, creative, thought-provoking, a great opportunity, and you can support them by going to their passes storefront on passes.com. Be sure to check it out on passes.com. All right. Now, Steve, we had some visitors inside the Michigan Insider studio this past weekend. Some of the top prospects in the 2026 class. Producer Ben, you can actually pull up some without actually playing the audio. But if you go to the YouTube page, you can actually pull up a couple of these videos to play in the background. But some of the top targets in the 2026 class made it over. Jermaine Kinsler. We also had his teammate over there, Jordan Thomas, made it by. And then not his teammate, but with the same group, Travis Johnson, not to be confused with the Travis Johnson from the early 2000s, but Travis Johnson, the receiver from Chesapeake, Virginia, made it by. And then a young man by the name of C.J. Edwards also made it by as well. But visitors to the University of Michigan last weekend before the dead period, this was a big visit weekend for Michigan, considering that 3 of those 4 are 3 of the top prospects in the 2026 class.
Yeah, so big opportunity for Lou Esposito, New Jersey native, right? New Jersey's back at the forefront of Michigan's recruiting efforts. Both Thomas and Kinsler go to Bergen Catholic. It's a school Michigan fans who follow recruiting and probably at any level or at least have heard of before, if not overly familiar. Kinsler, I mean, he's an interest at at least 6'6", 6'7". Kind of reminds me of Chris Wormley. Just a big dude who can still kind of move. Probably like a 3-tech type guy at the next level. Jordan Thomas, one of the top defensive backs in the country. I think we talked about him a little bit before we got on, Sam. He's a Michigan kind of guy, Michigan, Notre Dame type kid. And then Travis Johnson. So Michigan still in a position where they can pitch early playing time to receiver prospects. I feel like nothing has changed as far as that goes. That whole Eastern Seaboard, though, Virginia, the DMV, a little bit north into New Jersey and Philadelphia area, might be the most important part of the country for Michigan in the 2026 class. They're recruiting a ton of kids out of Virginia. They're recruiting those 2 kids in New Jersey. There's a couple more. A couple kids out of the Philly area at Malvern Prep that they're going hard after. And then another top target out of Gonzaga in Washington, D.C. is a program, Kanoa Winston, Evan Link. There's another top guy there. So yeah, these are the types of kids, though, where I think we can find out if NIL, can really – we'll maybe know how much it's moving the needle with certain guys because, I mean, again, these are kids that every school in the country pretty much is going to be making a move on. And yeah, all 3 of those guys, though, and CJ Edwards, one they're still recruiting as well. But Kinsler, Thomas, Johnson, all 3 are going to be like what we always call tip-top sort of targets, like the guys that Michigan's really, really going to push for. Well, obviously there's a reason they were up, right? But still, names that we'll probably be discussing again at some point, I would imagine.
Yeah, Kinsler comes from, I mean, his whole family is like college athletes. That his uncle Latish was a college athlete at Cincinnati and played in the NFL, and he's now a sports agent, and he represents those guys. He represents obviously Jermaine, but he also represents Jordan. He represents Travis. He represents CJ. Represents some of those other student athletes, and but Jermaine's brother plays in Miami. He has another brother at CMU. His sister played at LSU. He has a cousin at Rutgers. Like that family is just super athletic, and Jermaine as much as we look at him as an edge, kid told me, he said some schools him as a tight end prospect too, which now that part I was like, really? It's like, and he said he's actually open to play in tight end. Now Michigan isn't courting him for the tight end position, but it just speaks to what kind of versatile athlete he is. I found myself, as much as they're really in it with Jermaine Kinsler. It was his second visit on campus. He said he's coming back in the spring. I think they are big time players in that recruitment and are going to continue to be. I really felt like, he's number 146 in the country, number 22 defensive lineman in the country. I felt like the guy they're best positioned with right now was Jordan Thomas. Cornerback. He said he compares himself to Will Johnson. I think that was a well-placed plant by Michigan. I think they planted that idea in his head. And I think it was a good plant because that's who he reminds me of. I mean, very cerebral player. I think Will is longer than him, but similar athleticism outside of the length. I think Will is probably inch and a half longer, but speed profile similar, and really, really thinks the game, Steve. You just see that, and not to say that he's just a guy who thinks the game, but it's that element of he doesn't just rely on his athleticism. A guy that really diagnoses the position as well. And I think that part of Michigan's defense appeals to him. That Michigan is a really complex defense appeals to him. And I think that part of Lamar Morgan appeals to him. The academic profile appeals to him. In day and age where NIL is super important and is going to be important, a kid who has never gotten a B, Steve. We started off the interview talking about that. I've never gotten a B. He said, I gotten a B on a quiz before. He said, but as far as, like a grade, he said, I've never gotten a B before. Academics are important to that kid.
Yeah, there's some guys, like when you first reach out, it takes like 30 seconds to know that, I always say, I immediately always kind of compare like Michigan, Notre Dame, because they recruit a lot of the same types of kids. So there are kids that you'll talk to where you're like, yeah, this is like a Michigan, Notre Dame type kid. Doesn't mean he's going to consider other schools, obviously, and may commit elsewhere, but those are schools that are going to be in it until the very end, right? And he's definitely one of them. Really, yeah, like you said, cerebral kid. And yeah, they should be able to turn on Will's highlight reel and say that cerebral nature, that film, that breaking down of the film, all that extra work in the film room is what got him those easy pick six, those walk into the end zone type pick sixes and stuff that Will has gotten in the past. So yeah, not one bit surprised. I know you guys are the ones that talk to them, and not one bit surprised of the kids there that he's the one that maybe it looks like Michigan is in the best shape with right now. And the other thing too, like you said earlier, the position he plays too. I mean, Michigan has consistently churned guys out. That's a position they've quietly been churning guys out. Josh Wallace is still on an active roster. Mm-hmm. Right. Obviously Will's going to be probably a top 10 pick, maybe higher. There's plenty of guys in the league that played cornerback at Michigan. So, a long list of players that Michigan can point to. But yeah, I mean, using Will as a pitch, with the draft in like a month and a half is probably the right thing to do if you're Michigan there for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And then Travis Johnson, he second time up to Michigan. I mean, the pitch with him got to be Bryce, right? It's got to be Bryce. Because until they show a passing offense that is really productive, you're recruiting on the promise of, Steve, right? That's really what it is. It's been exceedingly difficult to recruit receivers of late, which is why I've really been harping on what a great job it was recruiting Andrew Marsh. I mean, it's exceptional what they did to get Andrew Marsh because receivers look at Michigan like, what am I mean, what are we talking about? I mean, you haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver. I'm looking at and last year, I mean, at least before that, you could look at in the clutch, they threw it when they had to, right? They still were productive. They still had big plays, right? You still have Roman and CJ making splash plays, but last year they didn't even have that. So it's like, wow, Travis, when he's looking at him, he's like, man, wow. So when he came on the visit, they put him in front of Bryce. And he was like, yeah, that guy makes a difference. So that's what you're selling right now.
It is a good sell, though, because of the hype that Bryce has gotten and just, of course, just how good he looks and the potential he has. But Michigan also kind of doesn't have much of a choice as far as that being the pitch either, right? I mean, it is. I mean, it's very easy to negatively recruit Michigan at the receiver position right now. And then immediately, of course, I noticed that Penn State is one of the other schools that Johnson's considering. I'd be interested to know how they do, because as far as negatively recruiting, because they don't exactly light it on fire at the receiver position either. And I think their top 2 receivers the last 2 years have left into the portal. But either way, to every receiver Michigan's recruiting from here on out is probably going to have to meet Bryce Underwood, or at least watch him throw in a practice setting, or obviously on the field to have any chance to reel guys in, NIL or not, right? I mean, these top 150 kids are getting NIL no matter where they choose. You can maybe go over a little bit everyone else, or beat everyone else out in that regard. But there's still the idea that, hey, I mean, I don't want to just block. I want to get the ball. That's what receiver is for, is to receive. Right. I mean, so it's like, you gotta showcase something for these kids to get excited about, which again, I mean, like, now that we're talking it out, like you said, goes back to just not just getting Andrew Marsh, but Jacob Washington, 4-star in the composite, Jamar Browder. I mean, those are all 3 are like really good recruiting wins and additions for Michigan that Ron Bellamy was able to reel in by basically selling a hope and a dream, at that point, so, because I mean, all 3 guys committed before Bryce, type deal. So Ron did a hell of a job.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this edition. We're going to try to give you another episode this week, right? Look at, kind of set the table with more 2026s. This was focused more on wrapping up 2025, focused more on Haywood, focused more on putting a bow on the portal and wrapping that up. At least the portal in this window. There will be the spring portal, right? I think Michigan made some decisions. There were guys who they looked at, for instance, and said they made a decision and looked at what some schools were spending on guys, and they could have matched and said, you know what? Rather than spend this money on that guy, we could wait and see if we can do better in the spring, or just spend it in recruiting, right? I mean, this would be overspending on that guy. You'd be better served to not spend this money on that guy. There were guys in this cycle that were like that. You could probably, Steve mentioned one of them. Steve mentioned one of them. Like, do you really want to spend this money on that? No, you don't really want to do that, right? So anyway, hope you enjoyed this live edition of the Recruiting Insider. We're going to give you another one this week as we pick up the pace on the Recruiting Insider. By the way, Steve, we got a special going on over on the Michigan Insider, right now?
Yeah, so it's another, I think, 60% off, 50 or 60% off, free upgrades for our monthlies as always. This is coming off National Signing Day. Michigan, one of the only programs that really benefited today. And yeah, really more about setting the table for 2026. You also get locked in for the year. And then, like we always say, and I was just telling our Kevin Ryan yesterday, the Paramount Plus perk is it's more than just a perk at this point to me. It's like legit. And if you're a monthly user right now and you upgrade to annual, you get P Plus immediately. But yeah, I mean, that's, 60% is one of the bigger deals we do. And like I said, probably not a much, there are probably better times, but 60% off, you're going to get everything you need heading into spring ball, right? I mean, spring ball's coming up quickly. And then you get all the way until next year. So great deal.
All right, folks, we got to get out of here. Some Michigan basketball to watch. We're late, so we got to get over and watch some Michigan basketball. I had to, it was signing day, so look at that. I'm supposed to be watching Michigan basketball. I'm not even at the game right now because I'm with you guys. See, that's what happens on signing day. I'm with you guys right now. All right, so, but I got to watch the game. So we got to sign off, and we will see you on the next edition of the Michigan Recruiting Insider. We'll see you next time, folks.